Welcome to Series 4 of the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to leaders past, present and emerging. In this series, we're talking with amazing mums. We ask their tips, advice on how they raise their boys, all the while leading successful and diverse lives. As usual, we ask our questions of what is it to be a good man these days? And if you had a story that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd listen, what would the story be? I'm Dr. Ray Swan, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys in the modern world. The series is brought to you by Bryden Grammar, an all-boys school based in Melbourne, Australia. In this podcast, we speak with Martine Oglethorpe. Martine is a digital wellbeing and online safe educator. She's a speaker and writer and author of Raising a Great Kid in the Digital World. She has a blog, The Modern Parent, which is a fantastic resource. In the conversation, we talk about parenting, about values, connection and dialogue, as well as how to navigate the challenging digital world. I hope you enjoy the conversation today. So joining us now on the Understanding Boys podcast is Martine Oglethorpe. Martine, it's great to see you again. We were just chatting off mic before about our connection previously when I was a teacher and as a parent, but since then, you know, I've followed your work in digital wellbeing, on online safety, your work as a writer, and we'll get into your book as well, and also being a mother of 5 boys. That is unbelievable. How on earth do you manage it all?
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. And I guess we'll get into that, but it's sometimes just a day-to-day proposition.
One day at a time. Do you have a favourite?
Favorite child?
Yeah.
Yeah, every day there might be a different one, so it depends what's going on with them.
Oh, that's too good. I remember actually probably at the other end, you know, hearing a story of friends who they felt at the passing of their father, they all individually had thought that they were the favourite, which I thought was a great indicator of successful parenting, and particularly perhaps, you know, in terms of feeling loved. But that's great. But boy, wow, a house of 5 boys. You could almost be running your own school with 5 boys and such diverse interests and ranges.
Yeah, well, it did feel a little bit like that in the last couple of years with some remote learning and stuff. It was, but so thankfully, hopefully, that's not part of our lives at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it, is it? I mean, in Melbourne, Australia, we're I don't know, I've lost how many waves we've been through now, but probably like lots of parts of the world where everyone listeners are tuning in from, you know, we're still working with it, aren't we? Like the impact of it, the effect of it. I know talking recently actually to someone who's in education in the junior years, just thinking about the year 3 kids, you know, the ones that were in prep and then 1 and 2 and where they're at in terms of their connection to the digital space, but also, you know, some of the basics like their, you know, handwriting, writing formation, being able to identify, you know, phonemic awareness and sounds and, you know, how we hear all those things. Gee, it's a really interesting time to be an educator.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, even the social stuff. And I know, playgrounds and, those kids that are in grade 3 and have missed those couple of years of really formative years of working out, where you fit in, how you communicate with others, how you resolve conflict, all of those skills that just happen every day in the playground that they didn't get for those couple of years. So there's a little bit of work to be done, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's sort of backfilling. And, you know, one of the things that became really clear to me as an educator at the time and a little bit as a parent was so much of what we learn, we kind of is just reference to things that are already there, like, you know, the everydayness of school. And, you know, you sort of going to school teaches you a bunch of things. One is it teaches you a bit about self-regulation because you learn pretty quick that you have to have, you know, in terms of executive function, you have to kind of figure out the inclusion, exclusion in social groupings. And, you know, we see, I was talking to another educator at a different conference yesterday who was saying he was actually assessing year 12 history sacks and just observing that, you know, the kids just didn't want to finish it, or they, you know, they'd had enough, or he just wondered, was that a symptom of COVID and that lack of sort of, I guess, you know, the running all those tests in real time, you know, in a classroom as opposed to, you know, reduced time for tests in the online space. It's really fascinating. I'm not exactly sure where the leadership's going to come for this.
No, and I think we'll probably be seeing this, rolling out in a number of different ways, and we'll probably be discussing it for a number of years to come, and as we see some of those impacts and changes. So yeah, it will be fascinating.
So let's talk a bit about parenting firstly. This is in series 4 of Understanding Boys, and we're talking to really some people we've identified, like yourself, like fantastic mums that are kind of doing it all and, having, real impact in their field and in your field, particularly in digital wellbeing and online safety and speaking and writing and parenting. And, a little bit about, the modern parent and the blog. You do so many different things. I guess where I wanted to start with was just a bit more of a personal question, which is just around, your own experience of parenting. You're a parenting expert, but how have you developed as a parent? Like, how has it changed you as a person? It must be a fascinating journey with the kids.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think, I've got my eldest is 22 and I've got the youngest down to 11. So I have been doing it for a little while now, and it's certainly changed in many ways. And of course, it's changed me. But I think, parenting is one of those things where you experience the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And so I think for me, it's probably made me quite resilient, or I've learnt that I'm quite resilient, and to be able to, be adaptable and agile and all of those things that you need for the different children, different needs, and different things that happen in your life. And so I think probably just recognizing my own resilience and ability to get things done, as well as to be the mother that I want to be, has probably been something that I've learnt about myself.
Yeah, it's massive. And, I want, do you have any tips or advice? We talk a lot about resilience, and I guess primarily resilience is the ability to bounce back and, to find our way again. What from your perspective, at a parenting level, have you found that's been really useful? And people have talked about, having their own time in a day, where they can do the thing they enjoy without being encumbered by other things. I imagine there wouldn't be a lot, a lot of time in your day, and certainly over times it would be.
Yeah, I think you can try and find that time. I think for me, I've always guess been fairly relaxed parent, which sometimes comes as a surprise when you tell people what you do, that I'm actually fairly relaxed around a lot of things, even around the digital world. I'm fairly relaxed around it in a lot of ways. But I think it also has come about because I've learnt not to sweat the small stuff as well, and recognize those things that are going to cause me stress, that are going to cause the family stress, that are not going to, be beneficial in the long run. So I think I was able to pretty early on recognize some of those things that weren't going to serve me well, and those battles that weren't going to go well. And so I learned to really, I guess, find a lot of joy in small moments. We've had some real challenges with our parenting. We've had my firstborn was, spent a lot of time in NICU when he was young, and had some challenges and some brain damage and physical damage as a result. So there was challenges with that. We lost a child at 4.5 months old, and so she came as our fourth child, and losing her was I think it obviously, as horrendous as it was, it certainly made me a better parent for the next two that came along, and partly because I was able to uh, recognize the things that weren't worth, my energy or my emotional energy, but really relish the things that were, and that really just came down to just having so much gratitude for those everyday things that I just enjoyed so much more with parenting those younger two, because I realized the preciousness of it all. And so I think it taught me that, that you can go through those things but still find those moments of joy, and to be able to really experience all of that as well.
It's a great it's an amazing story that you're sharing, particularly around that perspective about what really matters. And talking, you were saying about the I guess recognizing what's kind of really matters in things, and what doesn't. And I guess one of the strong impressions I just had was about the savoring, those alongside moments, that really do propel us forward in our lives. That I guess when we look back over our journeys as parents, that as difficult as times can get, that there is that sense of, yeah, this is really living as well, and the beauty and the value of that in those moments.
Yeah, and I think, our boys have grown up with that as well, and hopefully those reminders of how precious life is, but also how we do need to take the good with the bad, and things happen that are out of our control. But it's what we do with those things that count. So I hope that's a lesson that I've helped instill in my boys.
Yeah, that is so true that you can't always control what happens, but you can control how you respond. I've heard people speak to that. When you look back again on your time, in parenting, is there, and I often wonder, so I have two children, and I wonder as you go to having more children, is there, how is the expansion of that work? Is it like, okay, once we're at this number, it doesn't, like I've got friends with different size families, but a larger family, I imagine, there's things about the car even, like, like getting everybody places, getting them fed, like even at that level, it must be a bit of an operation.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things that I guess just happened in a way. I mean, I only came from a family of 2, so I thought that's what I would do. I'd, have a boy and a girl like my parents had, but that didn't happen. My husband is one of 8, so his, idea of family was also different. And I think, we had the first 3 boys quite close in age. There's sort of 19, 20 months between both of the 3 of them. And then, it got to a stage where, "Oh, this is all right. They're doing okay. We could maybe go again." And we did, and we had our daughter, who, as I said, sadly passed away at 4.5 months. And so then it was, okay, do we do this again or not? Do we take that risk, and we did, and as I say, brought more joy to our life than we could ever have imagined. So I think by then it was like, okay, now there's a bit of a gap between him and child number 3, so we kind of need to give him a playmate. So we did, and he got another playmate. So then we ended up with 5 boys, and so which is it is great, and I'm glad that they have each other as well. But they also have their older boys as well as siblings, which is a really nice place to be. And certainly when they were younger, I felt parenting the 2 younger boys so much easier than I did parenting the first 3. I think, you've got those extra pair of hands and those extra eyes when you're, out to dinner or on holidays, and there's someone else to look out for them, and just also someone else to hang out with them and play and do all of those things. So yeah, it certainly wasn't really planned, of course, that way, but yeah, that's how it turned out.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I have 5 in mine. So as I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the funny mixes and the big meals together, and it's been great actually as we've all grown older together and into our adulthood. Having that having all the uncles and aunts and the extended family, it really does, I think, speak to what's beautiful about about families. So yeah, that's just, I love hearing that story. So that's absolutely fantastic. Let's jump into your blog and into your a little bit into your book, Raising a Great Kid in the Digital World. I'd just be interested firstly just to understand a little bit about what led you, whether it was to the blog or was the book based on the blog a little bit, or tell us a bit about your thinking around that and what you're really hoping to achieve with the book and the messaging that you do through the modern parenting.
Yeah, well, I think it started off with the blog, which was more of I guess, a general parenting blog, and I had done my master's in counselling. I'd been a school teacher for a little bit, and I felt like I had some messaging around parenting, which at that stage was just about try not to think too much about a lot of things, but then I also recognised that the digital world was going to play a big role in my family's life, and certainly in everyone else's life. So I guess it became a passion of mine, just looking into the impacts of this on our families, on our young people, and how we could best manage that. Because I guess I started to see, certainly in the early days of doing some counselling work with families, that there was a real disconnect between parents and young people. There was this misunderstanding around the role that it was playing, or just not understanding how it worked, or why it was such a passion for some young people, and therefore that battle that started to happen. And I guess I thought, there's got to be a better way than fighting against something the whole time, because it's not going anywhere. It's going to be here to stay, and it's going to evolve as it has. And so I guess I just wanted to find a way that we could work with the technology in our families in a way that, allowed our young people to still thrive with it. But of course, obviously, to minimize those risks that we were starting to see creep in, and to try and prevent those happening. So I guess the book came about after doing lots of speaking with parents and with students and with educators, and coming to see, I guess, that sometimes we want this magic fix, we want this privacy setting or this filter or this bit of software that's going to do it all for us and keep our kids safe, and they're going to be fine. But I think at the end of the day, it really just comes down to parenting, but parenting in a different world than probably the one that that many people grew up with. So it was giving parents the certainly a lot of the information. I certainly talk about gaming and grooming and gambling and all of the things that we see online, the impacts of social media on self-esteem and all of those things. So I certainly cover all of those things that you would expect, but there's also underlying that, I guess, that general parenting with your values that are important to you, parenting with connection to your young person, and having that open dialogue all of the time to work out, what is it about the technology that they like? How can we make that work for both of us? And how can we still do that in a way that protects them? And how can I have boundaries? And all of those things that are, that do come up and will continue regardless of how old they are. So I think, yeah, the book came about as a way for me to get all of the stuff that I'd often written about on my blog into something that was really concise and easy for parents to read. And I didn't focus it, I guess, too much on the technology side, as in I don't go into specifics of apps and games, because I knew that they would change a lot. So I wanted it to be something that people could still, tap back into and say, now, how can I have some boundaries around this? Or what are the things I need to think about? Well, if my young person's, getting a phone for the first time, and what are the conversations I need to have? And what's the critical thinking I want them to be able to have? So it's all around those the skills and behaviors and thinking that we want them to have, because they're going to largely be doing it on their own, at the end of the day.
And people often say with technology, the end game a little bit is about self-regulating. Like we want our kids to be better decision makers so that they, ultimately they're going to have a relationship to technology, which is going to be outside our remit. And often, there's questions about monitoring and, how what's the role of the parent at what age and stage in terms of knowing how much and to whom and on what platforms they're connected. I guess my question is it a realistic goal for us to be able to raise kids that can self-regulate when we have such difficulty regulating our own technology use?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit it on the head there. It is something that is very difficult to regulate, because these apps and these games are made, in very clever ways. They are made to hook our brains in, and they are made in ways that want us to stay on, and they know what the brain likes. It does like the reward systems. It does, like being connected. It does like seeing new things and novel things, and it is easy. It's there. It's very close at hand. It's bright and shiny, and it is hard to compete with, when we want our young people to experience a whole range of other things. And as we know ourselves, we can all get sucked into that, vortex of just scrolling and mindlessly scrolling and scrolling. And then you look at, gosh, haven't I seen this 3 times before? And I think it takes a lot of discipline, and I guess some real conscious thinking about how you're spending your time. And so when I talk to young people, but also to parents about this, I think it's about, yeah, recognize how it works, how it hooks itself into our brains, and try and just be more conscious of what you're spending time on. And I think that's all we can really do. I mean, we can certainly start with some boundaries for our kids when they're young, and yeah, we don't only have it for certain times, or we don't have it before we go to bed, and all of those rules can be great and can work. But what we do also want is them to start thinking about, what's the role it's going to play in my life? How am I going to manage the distraction of it? And how am I going to make sure that I'm fitting in all of the other things that I need to fit in to develop and to be healthy and to be well-rounded individuals? So it is a challenge. As we say, it's a challenge for adults. So of course, it's going to be a challenge for young people who essentially know no different as well. They only know a world with these devices. So it's certainly, it is an ongoing challenge, but I think it's one worth working at, and worth just constantly, you know, giving yourself some time to think about what is the role it's playing, and if I just get off my phone, what did I get out of that, and can I do things differently, and maybe colour few people. What are these people doing to me? What's their voices, their opinions? How are they impacting us? So I think, when I talk to parents about young people on social media and things, it is a lot about that. What's the impact it's having on them, and how can they start to get to play a role in who they're following, whose voices they're listening to, and try and be more conscious of that as well.
And does that sort of show up as a conversation, at a dinner table, or how do you get the, if I'm a parent listening, thinking that sounds fantastic, I agree, because I completely agree. The impact on family, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing kids that are, like they're not kids aren't as responsive, and they disappear into their rooms straight away after dinner. There's no kind of kicking around bored, laughing over doing the dishes, like all that's gone. Um, how do you sort of get these conversations happening?
Yeah, I think they are just, as you said, conversations. Rather, I think if we can focus it on that rather than lectures or you know cyber safety lessons and things like that. If we have it as conversation around, if someone's laughing, if your young person's laughing when they're doing something online, saying, oh, what are you watching? What are you listening to? He's not always going to share it with you, but my one of my sons now will just send me a TikTok that he thinks I might find funny, or we have these certain memes that we both think are really funny, so he'll send me those, and so I guess it comes out in those. What are that's something that gives us a laugh, gives us a connection, and those sorts of things. So we do talk about, well, what are some of the things that aren't so great, or if you get off your phone and you might notice they're a bit cranky or something. It's what have you been doing? Is it who have you been listening to? Whose voices are in your head? It is just around conversation, or seeing things in the media. Something happens on the news, where someone gets in trouble with something they've shared, or they've lost a sponsorship contract or something like that. Have those as conversations. Oh, so what do you think went on with that? Gee, that's a bit unfair. It was one photo. It's cost him his career. What do you think about that? So it's just about trying to, wherever you can have those, teachable moments, but as a conversation can be more helpful than sitting them down and saying, now let's look at everything you're doing on your phone and tell me, who you're following and all that stuff. I think that can be a bit tiring for young people.
Yeah, I agree, and it's great because what I'm really getting a sense of from what you're saying is it's an alongside conversation, where it was an invitation to use the technology to connect, but actually connecting in the real world, and that we're connecting and talking about things that we're sharing and finding the space for it to be. So rather than it being, so that's one way in, and I guess the other way in is that as a shared conversation about the challenge of managing it, because we all have difficulty with our technology. I know I'm always checking my emails, or I have a rationale at home. It's like, oh, Dad's got to check his emails because he's something, and I check my emails, and I do something else, like check socials, or play chess, or whatever the latest Wordle or whatever's going on. So, but it is very impactful. Like, it really is changing our fabric. And I don't know if where your mind is with this now, and I imagine you're starting to think a lot more about where things are going with Meta. I mean, I saw an interesting ad for Ray-Ban sunglasses, which was suggesting that yes, you wear these sunglasses, but they actually have cameras in them, and then that will project into Meta. So we're already starting to be, through a cool brand, we're starting to be programmed, in inverted commas, to start to think about the where to, into this new metaverse that's going to have we can have avatars, and we buy clothes for these avatars that are all, somebody else owns all the content, and, it's a whole new ball game coming, I reckon.
It is absolutely a whole new ball game, and I think we've often talked about the importance of the critical thinking, of thinking who's got your data, what's being shared, all of those sorts of things, but also that I often say to young people, view everything that you do and see and buy. You've got to view everything with a healthy dose of skepticism online. Everything that you read or see, just in the back of your mind, how do I know this is true? What's backing this up? But I think that's it. Even that's going to get even harder and harder, because it's hard to tell a lot of the time what is true and what's not. And so some of our old skills we used to use might not be so relevant anymore. So it's certainly going to be be very interesting to see where it takes us. And I think, I guess for me too, and in my family, it's often been around, well, how can I still make sure that they are spending enough time in the real world, doing all of those other things that are really important. And I guess I'm lucky that my boys are very, sporty. They love their sport. They love, getting out with their mates and being active and all of those things. So I think for me, that's been a big bonus in a lot of ways. In that, they're often out a lot of nights of the week training and things like that. So they just haven't had that time to be completely engrossed in all of that. But of course, they will, get home and scroll and do all of those things and play video games and all of that. But thankfully, we're, at still being able to balance that a little bit with some other things.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was you were saying about parenting, and you were talking about the importance of values and connection and dialogue. And I think we've talked a lot about so far about connection and dialogue, but can you share with us a little bit of your thoughts about values and why they're so important in a family? And on a face level, they're important, but perhaps a better question might be, how do you, or how does a parent sort of develop family values? Like where do you go to? What do you reach for? Is it something that you just talk about? Where do they come from?
I guess I don't really, I don't think I've ever really sat down with my boys and said, okay, this is what's important to us as a family in terms of labeling those values. I think it just comes out in how you live your life and what they see and what we expect of them, just in the way that we live our lives. And I guess some of those boundaries that we've put in place are ones that espouse some of those values. So it might be that it's really important that that we're loyal to each other, that we that we're truthful and all of those sorts of things, and that we're kind to other people, and that we respect each other and we respect ourselves. And I guess hopefully that just comes out in the ways that we behave towards each other and our expectations of them, to do certain things. And when they don't do things that we don't think are great, that we tell them that, or we let them know, or we
Mm.
so I think for us, it comes out in all of the ways that we live our life, and the things that are important to us. Connecting with family and with friends is important to us. Being active is important. So all of those things just come out through our daily life, and I guess rub off on them in that way. I think there's that old saying that kids will do what you do rather than what you say. So I think it's about trying to live those values more than anything.
Yeah, it's great. So we're chatting about values, about connection, about dialogue, and this, I guess, is alongside approach. Where you're using technology and the disruptions that it may cause, but also using it as a way of, I guess, actually connecting. Folding back into the family, and what are some of the things that we're seeing, and we're in this together, which I think is absolutely fantastic. One of the things that I wanted to ask you a little bit about was, are there where are the boundaries? And do you have sort of broad guides on how young is too young? How much time is too much time? On technology. Do you sort of have some sort of rough guides around that?
I'm no, hard and fast rule kind of person. So for me, what I would have had when my oldest child was younger is very different, obviously, now to what my youngest child has, and obviously has a lot more, exposure and all of those sorts of things. I think when it comes to boundaries around technology, again, I probably ask myself three questions, and I certainly ask this of parents when they ask me, how much time should my 8-year-old have? How much time should my 12-year-old have? I think there's a couple of other questions that are really important, and one of them is, what are they doing with that time? So just to make sure that, half an hour on YouTube can be spent in vastly different ways. And so, what are they doing with the time? What is the impact that their time on the screens is having on them? If they're being supported by their friends, if they're being uplifted and motivated by what they're reading or watching, or if they're creating something, then that time is probably going to be okay. If they're getting bullied, if they're getting comparing themselves to what everybody else is doing online, if their self-esteem is taking a battering, then no amount of time online is going to be good. So that's the second question. And the third question is, what's the trade-off for all of that time online? So what are they missing out on? If they've got, time online, are they still getting time to be active, to be with their friends, to do their schoolwork, to walk the dog, to get enough sleep? All of those things that are really important. And so I think when we're looking at boundaries and time limits, it's, is my child getting all of those needs met? And are they having a healthier relationship with the technology first and foremost? Now, that's not to say that you can't come up with some boundaries that work. Certainly I like to think that there's no technology just before bed because we know they need that time to wind down. We certainly don't have it at the dinner table because that's a time that we connect and have conversation. And I don't want them to get into that habit to have it next to them at the dinner table. So there's certainly rules that sometimes change as well with their ages and their development, and certainly with the last experiences of the last couple of years, a lot of those sorts of boundaries go out the window for a lot of people. So I think focusing more on those questions around what sorts of things they're doing, what's the impact, and what's the trade off for that time online.
Great. It's really great advice. And I think what's really coming through really strongly in this conversation is just really common sense approach that you're taking. Like there's no particular exact line in the sand. There are, but there are principles at play, which you've articulated, principles around, what your family beliefs are, about the importance of those connections, about not sweating some of the small stuff. But also thinking about or taking enough time to think about, well, what is it that my child needs and are they getting enough of that? And what's the quality of the experience that they're having online? And do I need to pay more attention to that and intervene if so? Yeah, it's great. What is it to be a good man these days?
Well, let's assume that three of my boys, who I can probably call men now, are good men. They're 19, 20, and the 22-year-old. I'll assume that they're good men, and
I'm happy.
um,
I'm happy to vouch for one of them.
um, they are good men. And look, of course, they're not perfect and they're a work in progress. But I think anybody wanting to be a good person is a work in progress. Um, but I think for me, when I look at them and think of them as good men, I think sometimes it's about just taking those moments in time where you look at them or you have a conversation with them, and you think, gosh, you're actually a really likable person. And I think, sometimes I'll be with one of my boys and I'll think, yeah, you're actually pretty funny, or I would like to have you as a friend when I was young. You would have made a good mate. I think for me that's really important. But also, I think of another moment that was more recent when I was came into a locker room after a football match. My boys all love their football, and this was a 20-year-old, and he's come in, and they're all smelling of linseed and mud and sweat and testosterone everywhere, and and they're all 20 somethings, and they've come straight off the field, and they're all they're happy they've won a match or whatever, and I'm in the corner of the locker room, just come in for just a little bit, then I leave. They've sung the song, and my son comes over to me and puts his arms around me and gives me a big hug and says, "Thanks, mum." And and I think for me what that shows is, yes, kindness and caring and gratitude for what I've done for him to be there and enjoy that moment, but also shows a little bit of vulnerability. It shows that he's in front of all of those guys, he can still be quite confident to do that and be self-assured enough within himself to be okay to do those sorts of things. And so I guess for me that kind of wraps up all of the things that I want: kind, caring, grateful, but still a confidence and a self-assuredness in themselves that they can do and be who they are. So I think for me that sums up a good man.
Yeah, it's a great combination and very well articulated. And finally, if you had a story that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd listen, what would the story be?
Well, because you said 14-year-old, I'm going to say tell less stories and listen for their story. I find that age, that they've probably had a decade and a half of listening to my stories, listening to my the things that I want for them, the rules and the things I want to teach and the guidance and all of those things. And I think when they get to that age, I guess I've found that it's a time when they're now, yeah, you've told me all of this stuff, we're living all this stuff. Now I just want to work out what I do with all of that. And I find that, it can be that age where, um, kids start to shut down a bit, and they're trying to find that independence and where they fit in the world. And I think sometimes, whilst of course, there's many wonderful stories we can tell them, I think, for me, it's about taking a step back at that point. What are your passions? What are your concerns? What are your challenges? What's going on with your friends? And just giving them that space. to talk if they need to. I think sometimes as parents, we think our role is to, and certainly when they're young, we're there to protect them, and we problem solve for them, we make things right. But I think as they get to this age and beyond, we want to. We're not there just to fix them. We're there to certainly still guide them and things like that. But I think we need to be really listening to them and what their story is and what's important to them, and let them know that we're here. That but we don't always have to be telling them what to do or how to do it as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Someone said to me once with parenting, one of the central questions is, if I intervene, is this really helping? What's real? What really needs to happen here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Martine, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to reconnect with you and just to hear some of your wisdom, and your story. And thank you for being so real and sharing with us your thoughts about parenting and some of the difficult things that you've been through, but ultimately, some of the real impact that you're having. I know I've heard you speak and into the modern parents and the work that you do in lots of different platforms. So we're really grateful, for what you do, and long may it continue. And thanks from all of us from Understanding Boys.
Thanks so much, Ray. I've loved the chat. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.